Welcome to my story time by mybooksummary.com. Get ready for quick wisdom of countless stories and explore. The Yemen Civil War, 2014 present. Yemen, often referred to as the Arabian Peninsula's poorest country, has long been a land of cultural richness and historical significance. However, in recent years, this small country has become the epicenter of one of the world's most devastating and complex conflicts, the Yemen Civil War. What began as a political dispute between rival factions has spiraled into a full-scale civil war with profound humanitarian consequences. The war has involved regional powers, humanitarian crises, and the fragmentation of Yemen's social fabric, leaving millions suffering in its wake. The Yemen Civil War is more than just a battle for control. It's a clash of ideologies, an international proxy war, and a crisis of unprecedented scale. In this in-depth exploration, we will break down the origins, key events, foreign involvement, human cost, and the ongoing effects of the Yemen Civil War. With the situation still unresolved, it is crucial to understand the forces at play and what might lie ahead for Yemen. Introduction: the storm that started in the south. The roots of the Yemen Civil War can be traced to the political and economic instability that had been simmering in Yemen for decades. Yemen, which has been divided between the more developed and politically stable north and the underdeveloped and impoverished south, faced long-standing challenges. After the unification of North and South Yemen in 1990, tensions between the two regions lingered, particularly with the unequal distribution of wealth and power. In 2011, the Arab Spring uprisings spread across the region, leading to widespread protests and the eventual ousting of Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who had ruled Yemen for over 3 decades. His departure did little to stabilize the country. Instead, it set off a power vacuum and left Yemen in a state of political turmoil. In the years following Saleh's resignation, his successor, Abdurabu Mansur Hadi, struggled to maintain control. Hadi's government was beset by corruption, weak governance, and an inability to address the country's growing economic challenges. By 2014, the country was already on the brink of collapse, with various factions jockeying for power and resources. The beginning of the conflict, the Houthi uprising. 1. The Houthi movement's rise. The immediate spark for the Yemen Civil War came in 2014 when the Houthi movement, an armed rebel group from the northern part of Yemen, launched an uprising against Hadi's government. The Houthis, a Shia group originating from Yemen's northern highlands, had long been dissatisfied with the political system, especially their marginalization under Saleh's regime. Their grievances included economic disparity, lack of representation, and perceived religious persecution. In 2014, the Houthis seized control of Yemen's capital, Sana'a, and forced President Hadi to flee. The Houthis, who had been gaining strength and support since the early 2000s, quickly took control of large portions of northern Yemen. They claimed they were fighting against corruption, sectarianism, and foreign interference, but many of their actions were seen as an attempt to establish an autonomous Shiite state in the north, a goal that alarmed both Yemen's Sunni majority and neighboring countries. The situation escalated in early 2015 when Hadi's government collapsed. Hadi fled to Saudi Arabia, and the Houthis, backed by military units loyal to the former President Saleh, effectively took control of the country. This marked the beginning of the Yemen Civil War, as we know it today. 2. The split between the north and the south. While the Houthis controlled the north, including the capital, the south was not easily pacified. Yemen's southern region, which had been an independent state until its unification with the north in 1990, harbored a separatist movement. The Southern Transitional Council, STC, emerged as a key actor in the south, demanding greater autonomy or even independence. The south became a battleground between Hadi's loyalists, the Houthis, and the STC, further complicating the conflict. Meanwhile, the government in exile, led by President Hadi, called on the international community for support, particularly from Saudi Arabia, to help restore his government. 2. The internationalization of the conflict, Saudi intervention and foreign powers. 1. The Saudi-led coalition. In response to the Houthis' advances and the collapse of Hadi's government, Saudi Arabia and several other Arab nations intervened in March 2015, forming a coalition to fight against the Houthis. The coalition, which included the United Arab Emirates, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Egypt, and other states, supported Hadi's government in its quest to regain control of the country. Saudi Arabia's primary concern was the rise of a pro-Iranian, Shia-led government in Yemen, which it feared could alter the balance of power in the region. The Saudi-led coalition launched an extensive air campaign, targeting Houthi-held areas, including the capital Sana'a. The coalition also imposed a naval blockade on Yemen to cut off the Houthis' access to arms and supplies. However, the coalition's actions also resulted in widespread civilian casualties, with airstrikes hitting markets, hospitals, and schools. The toll on civilians has been catastrophic, drawing widespread international condemnation. 2. The role of Iran. Iran, a key Shia power in the region, became a major supporter of the Houthis, although the exact nature and extent of its involvement remain a matter of debate. Iran's support for the Houthis includes the provision of weapons, military advisors, and training, although Iran has denied direct military involvement in the conflict. For Saudi Arabia, this Iranian-backed presence in Yemen represented a direct threat, exacerbating the already tense relations between the two regional powers. Yemen thus became yet another battleground in the broader regional power struggle between Sunni-majority Saudi Arabia and Shia-majority Iran, often referred to as the proxy war in Yemen. 3. The UAE and other regional actors. The United Arab Emirates, UAE, also became a significant player in the war, backing various militias that operated in the south and east of Yemen. The UAE's involvement was motivated by both a desire to combat the rise of Iranian influence and to safeguard its own strategic interests in the region. The UAE has also supported separatist movements in the south, particularly the STC, which has at times clashed with Houthi forces. The complex involvement of foreign actors in Yemen's civil war has only prolonged the conflict, with each side receiving military, financial, and diplomatic support from powerful regional powers. This external involvement has deepened the divisions within the country, making it harder to reach a peaceful resolution. 3. The humanitarian crisis. Yemen on the brink of famine. 1. Civilian suffering and death toll. The Yemen Civil War has triggered one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. According to the United Nations, more than 230,000 people have died as a result of the conflict, either from direct combat or from the devastating consequences of war, such as disease and malnutrition. Millions of Yemenis have been forced to flee their homes, creating one of the largest displacement crises in the world. The country's healthcare system has collapsed, with hospitals and clinics overwhelmed and understaffed. The ongoing conflict has severely hampered the delivery of humanitarian aid, making it nearly impossible to provide food, medicine, and other essential services to the population. The war has also decimated Yemen's infrastructure, leaving roads, bridges, and airports destroyed or unusable. Perhaps the most tragic consequence of the war is the widespread famine. Yemen is on the brink of famine, with over 20 million people, about 80% of the population, requiring humanitarian assistance. This includes millions of children suffering from malnutrition and starvation. 2. The impact of airstrikes and blockades. Airstrikes by the Saudi-led coalition have targeted vital infrastructure, including food warehouses, water treatment plants, and agricultural fields, exacerbating the dire food crisis. Additionally, the naval blockade imposed by the coalition has restricted the flow of food, fuel, and medical supplies into Yemen, making it even more difficult for the country to recover. The blockade and airstrikes have had a disproportionate effect on the civilian population, and human rights organizations have condemned both the Houthi rebels and the Saudi-led coalition for violations of international law. These violations include indiscriminate airstrikes, the targeting of civilians, and the use of landmines. 4. Attempts at peace, the path to negotiations. 1. The stalemate. As of 2021, the Yemen Civil War remains in a stalemate. Although the Houthi government has regained some territory, much of the country is still under Houthi control. The war has divided Yemen into multiple factions, with the Houthis in the north, Houthis government and its allies in the south, and various militias in between. The involvement of foreign powers has made peace negotiations even more complicated. The United Nations has attempted to mediate peace talks between the warring parties, but progress has been slow, with multiple ceasefires being broken. The Houthis have called for greater political autonomy and the removal of foreign forces from Yemen, while the Houthi government insists on the Houthis' complete withdrawal and the restoration of the legitimate government. The challenges of reaching a peace agreement are compounded by the involvement of regional powers like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran, each of which has its own interests and objectives in Yemen. 2. Prospects for peace. Despite several rounds of peace talks, a lasting solution remains elusive. While there have been some temporary ceasefires and attempts at de-escalation, these agreements have often been fragile and short-lived. The deep divisions within Yemen, the involvement of foreign actors, and the complex web of alliances and rivalries all make finding a comprehensive peace deal incredibly difficult. Final thoughts: a nation in ruins. The Yemen Civil War is one of the most devastating conflicts of the 21st century, and its effects will be felt for generations. The war has torn apart one of the poorest nations in the world, leaving a legacy of death, destruction, and displacement. Millions of Yemenis continue to suffer as a result of the conflict, and the country's path to recovery seems long and uncertain. As the war continues with no end in sight, the international community must do more to address the humanitarian crisis and push for a lasting peace. Yemen's suffering cannot be ignored, and the world must act to help end the conflict and begin the process of rebuilding this war-torn nation. The Yemen Civil War serves as a tragic reminder of the human cost of geopolitical rivalries and the consequences of failing to address political instability before it spirals out of control. For Yemenis, the war is not just a battle for power, it is a struggle for survival. Stay tuned for more enlightening content. Head over to www.mybooksummary.com. Don't forget to subscribe and share the magic with friends, and let's grow together through the power of books and interesting stories.